Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of MartechBrain, where we talk to some of the best brains in marketing and bring you trends in what's happening in the world of marketing technology. It's a Netcore initiative. My guest today is Varun Ramamurthy, co-founder of Hansel.io. Hansel was recently acquired by Netcore, so Hansel is now part of our Netcore family. And we'll be talking with Varun today about a fascinating topic. And it's also where he has done a lot of work in Hansel. We'll cover that also later on. Our topic for today is essentially the use of behavioral science in product management. So cutting edge ideas. And I think if you're a product manager, there will be a lot of interesting ideas for you to take away from here. Welcome to MartechBrain, Varun.
Thanks, Rajesh. Pleasure.
So how did you fall in love with this topic, with this theme?
My stint at product management actually started at Zynga. And the way we used to develop and design games was one of the fundamental, probably, reasons why I got fascinated with this whole idea of behavioral science, right? There is a very simple, very intuitive concept that we apply in Zynga. It's called the concept of core loop, right? So what is the core loop is the first question any Zynga product manager will ask about the game that you're defining. So if you say, hey, I work at Farmville, and if you want to define the core loop of Farmville, and I'm sure like maybe people from this generation might not know, but 10 years ago, it was one of the biggest things ever, right, on the internet. So, and I know some of my friends who've woken up at 3 a.m. in the night to kind of like sow these farms and stuff. So if you look at Farmville, the core loop is essentially planting seeds. Then you have watering, and then you have harvesting, and then you have a trigger to come back and plant the seeds again. And this is it. That's all. The game is only this. And you have a lot of these triggers around the core loop so that the user actually comes back and does this again and again and again over a period of time, right? And that's precisely why I was kind of like, wow, this is just amazing, right? The moment you have habit loops like this created, your product becomes a lot more sticky. It becomes a lot more meaningful. Now, the question that we have to ask ourselves is like, whether it's in the good meaningful or the bad meaningful, but that's a separate topic about ethics and stuff. But and you can argue about it both ways. But that's kind of like the starting point for my fascination on this topic. And I've been like thinking about this and applying some of these concepts in my product management experience as well, as I worked at Flipkart, and then I started my company as well, which also incidentally delves into the very same thing that I've been sort of thinking about all these years. So that's pretty much the reason for this fascination, as you may call it.
I think very interesting you talked about Farmville. I remember 10 years ago, my 5-year-old son that time was fascinated by Farmville, and we would sit together and played. And I think all very good games, like even Clash of Clans, etc. Are very good at getting this core loop. I didn't look at core loop, but now that you mention it, it's very right. You know, you pick up some gold or you pick up some elixir, and then you have to fight someone and to make more and so on. So that's a simple loop that they create. Great point. Now, essentially, what you're saying is really that it's about creating behaviors as you're using apps and websites or products, basically. Now, presumably, behaviors can be both good and bad. And that's one sort of track that we should explore. And second is, what you really want as a product manager is you want behaviors which basically lead to habits and not shortcuts. So let's go into that a little bit.
Got it. So I actually love taking examples, right? And it's not that one is bad or one is good, but let's take an example for the first question that you asked, which is basically good behavior versus bad behavior. And this is where I think it boils down to ethics. And this is where it's kind of subjective. It's not an objective answer as to like, so I'll give you an example, right? Some of these games that I've myself worked on are highly addictive. So there's always two sides of the coin, right? So one side of the coin says, hey, dude, you're actually gaming the whole system by making people get addicted. But the other side says that's actually great because these are people who would otherwise have nothing else to do, and it keeps them occupied. There's a purpose, but it's all very hazy in some of these areas. But in other areas like investing, for instance, you know a good from a bad very objectively. And I think for this question, let's actually take this example right now. Both the products that I'm going to talk about are some of the best products in the stock market world, which is basically Robinhood. And in India, the equivalent of that is Zerodha. Now, and they both used behavioral sciences really well. And both of them, I mean, I want to talk about this one specific example, which is in the same industry and how they've actually used behavioral science in different ways. And I'm an extensive user of Zerodha. So obviously, I know a lot more about Zerodha than I know about Robinhood. But we all know about the problems that Robinhood is facing today in the whole concept of gaming the system and so on and so forth. One important thing that caught my eye, which there is just really no reason or no justification for that, or maybe there is, but I can't find a justification for that, which clearly is bad behavior, is introducing this concept of social proofing in investing, right? Now, how does it matter if these are the top 100 stocks held by other Robinhood users? Now, is social proofing the most, I mean, of course, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to I might be tempted to buy. And the fundamental rule of stock investing is you should know what you're investing in, right? And that just negates it. And it just says, hey, these people have invested and hence you go and invest. And this is not a behavior that you would want to sort of gamify, or this is not a behavior that you would want to bring in users, right? That's one example that I would say is not probably the best way of adding, or a best example of a behavior. It's basically bad behavior in my book. The other side is Zerodha. Now, what Zerodha does, and it's beautiful, right, is that there are these penny stocks and illiquid stocks that don't get or that don't have as much volumes as something like a Reliance, for instance. So when you try to trade some of those stocks, Zerodha actually tries to induce a behavior in you saying, boss, you're going to deal with illiquid stocks, which means that you probably do not know much about it. Read more about penny stocks here, read more about illiquid stocks here. Are you really sure you want to proceed? Right? So there is a stop there. And then probably, and a few of the users there, a percentage of the users, not everyone, some of them might have made up their mind. Basically, they might have done some research, which is great. But a lot of them might not. And that's the time they are introducing them to that whole concept of Zerodha varsity. And they kind of like get trained on what is a penny stock, what happens if you trade there, and so on and so forth. Right? So again, I know for a fact that this is good behavior. So this is an example of a subjective place where you know what is good, what is bad, right? So end of the day, it depends on the company. It depends on what the company is trying to do and where the moral compass lies. That's how I would put it.
And then if we just dig a little bit more into that, really as a product manager, your goal is to ensure that you're creating really habits and not just the shortcuts.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's the second part of the question. That's absolutely right? I think gone are the days, I would say, where as PMs, or maybe our KPIs were designed in such a way. I mean, again, everything has a root cause. It's a whole different topic as to why that happened. But a lot of times we have, I would say, silly KPIs like number of logins, right? Or click-throughs, right? End of the day, that's not what you're there for, or that's not what you're training the product, or that's not what you're training the user for. You really are training. So what you really need to think about is if a user logs in, what is the behavior you're trying to sort of induce, right? Or if a user clicks through on a particular button, what is the behavior you're trying to induce? And hence you sort of start framing the question around not number of click-throughs or number of logins, but the user behavior that you're trying to generate. So I think that trend has probably started, and why or how it. I think everything has a learning phase, and we're probably in the second phase of, I would say, product management, where we sort of start taking things a lot more seriously than before, right? We are not judged by arbitrary improvement in metrics that don't really make sense. right? I think that's one way we can think about it.
So in a way, Varun, what you're saying is that as a product manager, the goal should be not to just look at arbitrary metrics, drive sort of good behavior, which really turn into habits.
Absolutely.
Now, why is just let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about behavior itself. How is behavior coming into this whole world? Why is behavior so important?
Yeah, I think if you can summarize that in one line, it's just that we are all irrational. It's just. I mean, we think we are rational, but we are just irrational, and it's the fact that you have to take decisions, whether in real life or when you're using a product, you have to take decisions, and the decision that you will take is not something that is a constant, because that has a lot of variables as to why you're taking that particular decision at that particular point in time, which leads to the whole concept of, the same you is a different you like a few minutes later as well, right? Because you're doing something else altogether. And then there's this whole concept of information overload. There's just this whole choice paradox, right? The more choices you give, the more likely the user is not going to take any choice at all, right? So there are things like this that are there. But I think the fundamental reason for studying behaviors is the fact that everything is rooted in irrationality. So I would, in fact, go a step further and say it's probably time for us to give some sort of a framework where we don't really think about it as customer segments or, like a user who's this, and hence do this. And instead look at it as customer behaviors. But again, that's a highly lengthy topic, and I'm also not somebody I'm also researching and I'm also like reading up on that, but maybe that's a topic for another day, right? A customer segment versus a customer behavior segment probably could be different, and the same guy could fall in different customer behaviors, right? Whereas a customer segment would mean that guy is forever bucketed in that segment.
In a way, what you're also saying is that sort of the context also matters.
Absolutely.
So the same you or the same me could act differently in different contexts.
Yeah.
And therefore, rather than just bucketing me in one segment based on maybe my transaction history, I think it's important to look at the behaviors that I'm exhibiting.
Yeah.
And then the things that we do to people depends on those behaviors.
Absolutely.
So
or in other words, the why, basically. Why are you doing this action? Rather than, hey, you're doing this action.
Correct. Right? Okay.
So,
and this is now becoming a very important, or your belief is that this really should become a very important belief for product managers. And the goals therefore should be to drive good behavior rather than bad behavior, drive habits rather than shortcuts, and not just one-off actions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is where we need to sort of move the industry in product management towards.
Yes, and I think that's already started. Cursory search actually tells you that the search terms and search volumes are increasing. I've gotten a bunch of LinkedIn requests over the last couple of months, and in fact last year, where other fellow product managers are also talking about it, and the number of articles are going up. So I think this is a trend that is there, that is going to start. And it's good. I mean, again, like I always want to say, this is a fundamental principle I believe in. Right? There's always a good and a bad. There are always two sides of a coin. But this is a step in a positive direction, I would say. Right? And how companies use it, whether they use it to game the system or to manipulate, is a different idea, right? But end of the day, it's almost like you're guiding the user. And the user does not have all the information that you have as a person who created that product or created that experience, right? And hence the need for you to guide the user.
In fact, this is very interesting because it's going to take the whole area of how we design apps to a different level. Because earlier, these are the things I want. I want the person to put something in a cart or do something in a game. But you're saying now with a lot more data available, data available on what people are doing actually, and bringing the psychology element, the science of behavior, we can actually make better products.
Yeah, and I think this is a very good point you're bringing in, Rajesh. I think there's a reason why it's called behavioral science, right? At the end of the day, it's science. And the moment you strip out the science of that, I mean, you're just basically playing on gut. So, and which is where, for whatever it's worth, the whole testing rigor and experimentation rigor is something, and you should not just say, okay. Now, if something has happened in the past, and if somebody says, hey, this has not worked before, you should just stop and say, give me data. Like, there's no reason for you to believe something without data, right? So, end of the day, yeah, I think that's a very good point. It's science, end of the day, and that whole testing and experimentation rigor comes in. Of course, there are a lot of biases you need to be aware of while you're testing and experimenting as well. But that apart, it's always better to have a tested scientific approach than an anecdotal, hey, somebody did this kind of an approach, right?
And what I think good is that on websites and and in apps, of course, primarily, all of the actions that users are doing can actually be captured. You know exactly what the user is doing. And that can, unlike say in a supermarket, when you're walking around, it's very hard to capture. Of course, with cameras now you can do that. What products I'm picking up, what I'm buying, but what I'm not buying is equally important. And here for the first time, you almost have you can create a sort of replica of a person, an avatar as it were, you can then sort of guide along in specific ways.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Varun, what are some of the frameworks that can guide and that can guide product managers in this direction of using behaviors?
So, I think it's there are a lot of frameworks actually. So it's a very expansive field, right? And it's a lot. Some of these concepts have been used, I think, for years, especially in marketing. When you look at anchoring, especially with the whole popcorn industry, right? Like the small, medium, large, right? So anchoring effect in pricing has been a tried and tested formula, and it works, right? And the whole $99 is something that's again a tried and tested formula, right? But there are a few concepts that I would want to think of when I'm building a product. Some of them are close to my heart, which is one is obviously the core loop concept, which is the habit loop, as you call it. So what drives that habit is one. The second thing is, which is what Hansel.io was actually doing or is building and is actually delivering to customers, is this concept of nudge theory, which is something super interesting, right? It's a very simple concept. It's the fact that given a multitude of choices at any given point in time, the user is most likely to take that choice, which is the most elevated. What is the one that strikes? So if you have 10 choices and the one choice is the biggest of it all, you're just going to intuitively pick that choice, right? And it's actually interesting that this is something that's actually out there in the real world as well. And every day I come across some of these examples and I have a note of it in my diary, right? It's very fascinating. And one of the biggest examples they talk about is where in Copenhagen, the whole littering problem was not solved by a reward or a punishment. It was not solved by, hey, you're going to be fined or you're going to be given so many euros for, putting it in the trash can or the dustbin, as you may. Instead, what they did was they used a nudge theory. They started painting the footpath or the pavement with tiny footprints leading to the nearest trash can. So the moment you see those footprints, you kind of associate that with, hey, there is a trash can nearby, right? And you kind of like just follow that, and that is actually a documented study. So it reduced the littering problem in the streets of Copenhagen. So there are examples of this abounding. Of course, this is something that we are all learning, and there are examples where it has not worked. But all of that is literature. All of that is going to help us move forward, right? So that's an important concept. And this is the concept on which Hansel is also built on, right? Where we have some of these, what we call as nudges, that we will help you place in your product, right? And at the right time for the right user in the right journey. And then it's kind of like it becomes almost like a walkthrough, right? And the user is not stopped from doing something. The user still has the option to do anything else that they want. But by highlighting that one particular thing that they need to do at that point in time, you're most likely telling the user, hey, look, you can do whatever you want. but this is probably best for you, right? So that's one framework that is really interesting, and it's gaining prominence as well. The other, I think if you look at it from a framework standpoint, the piece of study that I would be going up to kind of summarize the whole thing is this whole fog concept, right? Which says that a behavior is a sum of three things. It's a sum of motivation, it's a sum of the ability, and the trigger. If any of these three is missing, you likely are not going to induce the behavior in the user at all, right? It's a really beautiful, it all has to come together. The user has to be sufficiently motivated to take an action. Once they are motivated enough, they should have the ability to take that action. And sometimes just these two is not enough. And if you're extremely motivated, just these two are enough, right? Like, because you will just do whatever to make sure that you do it. But most often you would need to have a trigger, right? So that's another framework to think about building these behaviors in the product, right?
Give an example to bring this to life, basically.
Yeah. So let's look at Google Maps. Google Maps. I mean, the core loop is point A to point B, and the user does it over and over, and it's obviously a very sticky product. Now, what Google has done, I mean, there are a lot of features in Google Maps that we probably are not even aware of, right? And one of the beautiful features that I use regularly, and because of, I would say, this concept of fog theory, right, is now the concept of labeling my oft visited places, right? Now, I mean, the simple thing is home to work, right? I travel from home to work on a regular basis, right? So that's point A to point B. Now, if I don't do anything, I'm still doing it because I'm motivated enough. But how is this becoming a behavior, right? Is where Google has done this really well, right? Now, what they've done is they've recognized that I go from A to B, which is home to office, very often, almost on a daily basis. So they've tracked it, they've figured it out. Now, they are giving me the ability to actually mark my point A and point B with labels, saying this is home and this is work. That's the ability they have given me with using this label feature, right? Now, just that behavior of going A to B and this ability to mark as labels was not enough, at least on an anecdotal basis for me, and which is also sort of something that's a reason why they've done this, was not enough to induce that behavior where there is A, there is B, and I'm going to mark labels, and because of that, they're going to send notifications and so on and so forth. Right? They added the third part, which is the trigger. So they placed a nudge on the nth time I went on that route, which said, do you go here often? Mark this as home, gym, whatever it could be, with proper labels that come in, right? And that's it, right? That's a place where all of these three things come together, and hence my behavior in using that product changes.
And by doing all of this, of course, it also makes it very sticky, because once
exactly.
In fact, now you see a lot of food apps doing this, home, office.
Exactly.
And it also gives them a better context of what you're ordering from where.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of, there is a lot of talk about privacy and data capture, but this is a place where it's actually beneficial for the user. Now, the moment I have those labels, not only am I given advanced sort of notification saying, hey, there is this delay or whatever, it also makes my driving easier because it's voice-based. I can just say, take me home instead of saying, take me to XYZ, right? So there's a lot of advantages that link to it. And that's what I would say as a really good product, right? It's fundamentally good for me as a user as well, right? And because it's good for me as a user, it's good for the company, and it's sort of a win-win. So nobody's losing in this, right? It's not a win-lose, it's a win-win. And those are the best products always.
Yeah, so in a way, what we are seeing is sort of the second generation in product management, where we are seeing the behavioral sciences really now start to influence how apps are designed, taking into account behaviors rather than just some metrics that are
Right.
I think game developers have done this very well through the years, and I think we are seeing this now get into more corporate-ish and consumer apps in a wider way. So great. I think I want to just talk a little about how all of this thinking really influenced you in building Hansel's products, and how
Right.
this whole nudge theory, etc., have come together, and how uh, app developers, how product managers can leverage what Hansel has created, especially I think that element around no code and how it makes it so
Yeah.
simple for them.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. I mean, this was basically something that, again, a lot of work on apps, and a lot of my friends are leaders in their own domain in different products and stuff. One of the key things that I observed over a period of time was that the gold standard of a product was Google search, where it had just this one thing that a user can do, which is just search, right? But unfortunately, that's not how the world is, right? Today, it's all about super apps or cross promotions, or you sell 100 things at the same place, right? It's all about getting people together at the same place, right? And even if they're the same place, there are 10 things that a user can do, right? So that's what started me thinking, right? Like, because if you give a user with such an overload of choices to make, how is that user gonna like even go forward? Or at that point in time, what should the user even do, right? Now you can't sit around and brood saying, hey, my metric is not going up, I released this feature. It doesn't matter, right? For the user, it didn't matter because it wasn't even in the scheme of choices that were there, right? And so that was like the quick genesis, right? Because products are becoming, for good or bad, they're not that gold standard of Google. Even if you look at Google search today, you have four or five, like if you look at Google search app today, it's not what it is, right? The moment you search for something, there is like a watch show, there is like videos, news. There are so many things out there, even in a Google search mobile. So that's how it is right now, and we'll have to acknowledge that this is the way things are going. And in this kind of a way, you need to know that the user needs or has to do a certain action, which is for the benefit of the user, right? So that was the triggering point. And the problem, however, is that if you have to do anything with your app or website, of course, it is a load of engineering change that comes in, right? And the moment you do that, all of this takes the backseat because you know you could have 100 priorities at that point in time, and there are different reasons for why those priorities are there. So how would you equip a product manager or a growth guy uh, in a company to induce behaviors without really going to an engineer, right? How can you do that? Was the kind of like it culminated in Hansel as an offering. So, and as we move on, so the thing is, we do have like we've kind of added a lot of these pre-built product experiences that you can just drag and drop. It doesn't matter what app, website, whatever it is, you can just drag, drop. You can set the entire uh, rules around that nudge, right? Which is a difficult task when you have to code it, right? There are so many different rules and these keep changing, right? Uh, so all of that is coming from a kind of like a no-code dashboard. And the way we've built this product is kind of like mimicking how a product manager thinks, which is in the form of flowcharts. This, and if a user does this, then what happens? And that's how you kind of like cover all the edge cases and stuff, right? So we wanted to give that flowchartish kind of an experience, and that's how we've created this product. Um, and and I mean, what I would want to tell users who use this product is like look at it for changing behaviors, not for taking a shortcut to improve one small metric. That's my recommendation if I have to go and talk to a customer of mine who's using this. But so far it's yielded like really good results for companies who are using, and we are really excited because every day we are learning that there are newer and newer kinds of these product experiences that we can add, and these are all coming from customers, and these are all going and enriching our product. So yeah, so that's the
Great overview. I think overall, I think in this
yeah.
whole area on how behavioral sciences and how you're actually using all of this to improve. Finally, it's about improving
Absolutely.
experiences for the end customers. And I think
Yeah.
the key intermediary in that is the product manager, and how the
Yeah.
product manager now has the power to really use the
Yeah.
science and the tech
Yeah.
from what Hansel is creating for
Yeah.
making those great experiences.
Yeah.
So coming now to the last segment are what I call the 5 ones. So one key tech trend that really excites you.
Uh, it's this whole GPT-3 phenomenon. I mean, I it's just crazy what it's. I mean, some of the examples that I've seen on Twitter of people applying is just phenomenal. I don't know where this is going to end, but maybe the future of machines coding themselves maybe not too far away. I don't know what will happen, but that's probably just a few decades away. I don't know. I mean, I don't know actually where this is going, but that's really fascinating. I think the possibilities are endless.
Absolutely. At least right now it's limited to text and writing, but coding
exactly.
in some way.
Exactly. It's some way away, but
one trend, one tech trend that has sort of disappointed you.
It's social media and facts. So it's like it's disappointed because not because, I mean, of course there are large scale ramifications, but I can see them even in my closer circles. Like friends who I were really, really close with, and because I'm in that circle, I kind of see the views and whether those are facts. Like it's personally disappointing, as well as I can see the ramifications. Of course, social media has largely democratized the whole information asymmetry problem that existed, but again, like it's always two sides of the coin, right? This is one thing that it's been disappointing, and it's disappointing in a way that we probably have not invested enough to the whole fact checking. Right? We've probably not invested enough. Maybe it's not a goal yet for folks, but hopefully that should change.
One good book recommendation?
Yeah. So the most recent book I read was What If. So it's an interesting book because it takes the most absurd questions and gives a scientific explanation to some of the most absurd questions. It's very fascinating, but more importantly, it's the fact that that it's okay to have absurd questions, but what is more important is to find out answers to them. So I think What If is really, really, really cool.
Great. And one good book, one good person or a podcast you feel people should follow?
I follow Naval on Twitter.
That's Naval Ravikant.
Naval Ravikant, yeah. I definitely follow him. There are obviously people who say, whatever, right? But at the end of the day, it's about what he says and not who he is. And what he says, it makes so much sense on a lot of levels. So yeah.
And for people who are Naval Ravikant fans, and I think a lot of fans out there, there's a new book come out, The Almanac of Naval Ravikant.
Okay.
So, I think that should be a great read.
Yeah.
And finally, one key driving belief in your life.
So the belief is that, I am a big believer of that whole pale blue dot concept. Right, end of the day, it's you have to look at the grander scheme of things. So don't take things too seriously. Right. So, my belief is that look at it from the larger picture, and the larger picture is just it's almost endless. So it's pale blue dot, right? So that's my driving belief.
Beautifully put. So thanks a lot, Varun. And in fact, as you were saying, a lot of what you said actually brought me to this thing that, maybe we should all read that Freakonomics book again. Human behaviors. And I think these ideas of I think, which are core in economics, which studies human behavior and how people react, psychology, some of these sort of quote what we used to call as liberal arts when we were studying engineering. I think many of those disciplines now need to come back into the world of software, because you're dealing with things at the other side.
Right. Absolutely.
So it was a great conversation, Varun. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So, friends, that was this edition of MartechBrain with Varun Ramamurthy, co-founder of Hansel.io. Thank you for listening, watching. We'll be back with another edition next week. Thank you.